Understanding something often feels like progress. That feels natural. But there's a quieter moment most people notice. The moment where understanding feels satisfying before anything actually changes. In the shorts, one question was left open. Why does understanding alone feel like movement? This video continues from there. Understanding often feels like progress. You read something new, label a pattern, or finally see why a situation keeps repeating. For a moment, the world feels more orderly. But that feeling can be misleading because understanding changes how things feel before it changes what you do. Uncertainty is expensive. When you don't understand something, your mind keeps running multiple versions at once. It scans for missing information, predicts outcomes, and tries to reduce surprise. The tension gets pulled in different directions, even if you are sitting still. That internal friction is what people often call being stuck. Then clarity arrives. A concept clicks. A framework appears. You can finally explain what's happening in a clean sentence, and the friction drops. This matters because your brain treats reduced friction as a signal. Less friction feels like progress. Not necessarily because anything improved, but because the mental cost of not knowing has decreased. Now notice what did not change. Your schedule is the same. Your environment is the same. Your habits are still running. The triggers that pull you into old behavior are still present. The only thing that changed is the internal story. This is why understanding can become a substitute for doing. It resolves tension immediately. It gives you closure without requiring exposure to real conditions. It produces a reward in the present, while action usually charges a cost up front. Action is not just a decision. Action is a performance inside constraints. Real change asks for resources in the moment. Time, attention, energy, and tolerance for discomfort. It also asks for stability. If you are tired, rushed, socially observed, emotionally activated, or distracted, your knowledge does not translate cleanly into behavior. The same person can act differently across different days, even with the same intention. Understanding is cheaper than behavior. You can learn while exhausted. You can read while anxious. You can watch and agree while your life stays exactly as it was. It fits inside existing routines. It does not demand a new schedule. It does not force conflict with other priorities. So the system learns a pattern. When tension rises, seek clarity. When clarity arrives, feel relief. When relief arrives, interpret it as movement. Over time, learning becomes a loop that manages emotion. And the loop is reinforced because it works. It makes you feel more competent. It makes the situation feel more controllable. It turns confusion into coherence. But coherence is not the same as change. A person can become very good at building explanations. They can describe the problem with precision. They can point out their own patterns in real time. They can even predict what they will do next and still do the same thing. That gap is not primarily about laziness or a lack of care. It is structural because behavior is sensitive to context, and context is rarely consistent. Small shifts matter. A conversation changes what you say. A deadline changes what you avoid. A quiet room changes what you notice. A phone notification changes what you finish. Even a slight change in mood can change what feels worth it. Understanding tends to ignore this volatility. It produces a clean, portable story. It makes the future seem stable. It makes the plan feel usable everywhere. But action requires the plan to survive the present. There is also a timing illusion. Understanding arrives in a single moment. Action requires many moments. A concept can click while you are calm. alone, and focused. But the behavior you want often has to happen when you are not. It has to happen when you are busy, reactive, or being watched. It has to happen while you are already doing something else. So the same decision is not the same decision. It is a different problem every time you face it. This is why people often say, "I know what to do, I just don't do it." What they mean is, I can describe the solution in a safe context, but the real context keeps changing. In the shorts, the idea was simple. Understanding can feel like progress. The longer version is not that understanding is bad, it is that understanding is a different category of change. It changes meaning before it changes behavior, and meaning changes faster. That mismatch creates a trap. You feel movement, so you lower effort. You lower effort, so nothing changes. Nothing changes, so tension returns. Then you seek more meaning because it is the cheapest way to reduce tension again. If you watch this pattern carefully, you can see why advice often fails. Advice adds meaning. It adds clarity. It can even add a plan. But if the plan assumes stable conditions, it collapses. So the person repeats the cycle. Learn, feel better, stall, feel worse, learn again. This is also why you can sincerely agree with an insight and still repeat the same habit the next day. Agreement is cognitive. Habits are procedural. They're stored as shortcuts for saving attention under pressure. And pressure is where the gap shows up. This is why I understand it often becomes the stopping point. Not because you chose to stop, but because the system already received a reward. The discomfort that drove the search has been reduced, and the urgency disappears. This also explains why some videos, books, or insights feel powerful, and then fade without changing your life. The insight did not fail. It did its job. It reduced uncertainty. You felt better, and your brain tagged feeling better as the outcome. Yet the real target was behavior. So what actually moves behavior? Usually not more information, usually not more clarity. Behavior tends to shift when constraints shift. Sometimes the environment changes. A new routine appears. A different social group changes what is rewarded. A new role changes what is required. A deadline forces a choice. A loss removes an option. A gain creates slack. Sometimes internal constraints change. Sleep improves, stress drops, energy returns. Attention becomes less fragmented. When constraints shift, action can suddenly look easy. From the outside, it seems like a breakthrough. From the inside, it feels like the moment finally became workable. This is why change can look abrupt even when it was gradual. The person may have been accumulating small adjustments, tiny experiments, minor failures, partial attempts, small rehearsals. But those do not look like progress on the surface. They look like inconsistency. Then, one day the conditions line up enough that the behavior holds. Not perfectly, but long enough to feel real. This leads to common misunderstandings. One is, if I really understood, I would already be doing it. That treats behavior like a direct output of insight. But behavior is an output of constraints. Another is, if I don't feel motivated, I'm not ready. Motivation is a feeling. Readiness is a structure. Another is, if it's difficult, something is wrong. Difficulty often just means the present conditions are expensive. And another is, if I keep learning, I'm moving forward. Sometimes you are. But sometimes you are only managing the discomfort of not moving. So the useful shift is subtle. It is not to stop learning. It is to stop treating relief as evident. Relief is information, but it is not proof. It tells you uncertainty decreased. It does not tell you behavior changed. When you notice this, the loop weakens. You stop mistaking clarity for momentum. You stop reading comfort as progress, and the insight becomes quieter, less inspiring, more practical. You may still learn, but you begin to watch a different variable. What actually changed in the environment? What actually changed in the schedule? What actually changed in the constraints? Because that is where behavior lives. And that is why the most convincing insight can still be inert. It can reorganize how you interpret yourself without reorganizing the conditions you act inside. So the result feels like growth, even while the behavior stays in place. Thanks for staying with us until the end. If this perspective helped, a like, comment, or share supports this work. And if you want more reflections like this, consider subscribing.